Hi, I'm Gareth, and in this video I'm going to spend a few minutes thinking with you about the half diminished seventh chord, which will be familiar to many people and probably something that other people have never heard of. But I also want to just kind of pose a little question, like, is it really the half diminished seventh chord, or is it a chord that's sometimes known as this, the minor seventh, and then the minor seventh flat 5 chord? Okay. So is it really that, or are those two things the same thing as each other? Or is it this? A borrowed chord. So let's have a think about these possibilities, and then actually by looking at these things from these various angles, it will help us to use it more effectively. So what are we talking about when we're talking about this half diminished seventh chord? Well, we're talking about a chord that has a root, a bottom note, in other words. It's got a flat third, it's got a flat fifth, and it's got a flat seventh. Okay, so let's see if we can work out what that would be. So if I'm in the key of C, for example, so C major, no sharps, no flats, I put C at the bottom, so there's my root. So the third would be E in the scale of C major, so the flat third must be E flat. The fifth would be G in the scale of C major, so the flat fifth is G flat. The seventh would be a B, but if I'm going to flatten it, it's going to be B flat. So there we are. That's the recipe, if you like, for a half diminished seventh chord. It's not the same as a diminished seventh chord. In a diminished seventh chord, all the notes have to be a minor third apart. So in fact, if you go from C to E flat in this example, that's a minor third. If you go from E flat to G flat or F sharp, that's a minor third. But to do another minor third, I'd have to go from F sharp or G flat up to A. That would give me a diminished seventh, but this is not the same thing, because at the top, between the top two notes, in this case the G flat and the B flat, I've got a major third. So I've got a minor third from the bottom to the third, another minor third from the third to the fifth, but at the top I've got a major third. So just so we're clear about the distinction between what's a diminished seventh chord and what's a half diminished seventh chord, and the recipe so that you could form one of these on any note that you want to is to say, well, here's my note. Above that, I'm going to put a flat third, a flat fifth, and a flat seventh in relation to the key signature. So I'm working in C as my root, so I'm thinking in C major. If you wanted to do one on D, think in D major. D major's got an F sharp and a C sharp, so when you come to a flat third there, you're going to say, well, the third note's F sharp. When I flatten that, it becomes F natural. So there is your recipe for a half diminished seventh chord, or a minor seventh flat 5 chord. Okay, well, I'm going to do a little example now in the key of G major. So let's have a think about what our chord would be in the key of G major. Well, one possibility here is that we could be building this on A. If I go from, I'll explain why it's built on A in a minute. I'm going up a minor third, or the flat third, to C. The flattened fifth is E flat, and then the flattened seventh is G natural, because in A major it would be G sharp. So I get this chord. Okay, but what happens if I use that chord in the context of a piece of music in G major? This is what I'm coming on to talk about in terms of the third title. So bear with me for a moment while I just sketch out a very short melody. And it's not a very exciting melody, because I'm not trying to draw attention to the melody. I'm trying to draw attention to the use of this chord that we're considering. Okay, so There's a couple of bars of a melody in G major, might be the approach to a cadence, for example, and maybe it's got a bass part that does this. Okay, let me fill in some notes there, and then I'm going to talk about what I'm up to. So there's a chord there that we might know as a chord 4 or as a C major chord. I'm then going to put this in, which we'll come back to in a minute because that's the chord in question. And then I'm going to kind of resolve that chord so we can get to a cadence. Okay, so let me just play what I've written on the board. It goes like this. Okay, let's look at this chord, although having put that one in, maybe I'll put the others in for you. So that's a 1C, a 5 and a 1 in the key of G major. Okay, now we're fairly happy that this chord we've already talked about. We talked about this half diminished 7th chord or the minor 7th flat 5 chord being A, C, E flat and G. What am I doing here? I'm using exactly that chord. A, C, E flat, G, redistributing the notes and putting it in first inversion. So I've got C at the bottom. So there's the first inversion of that chord. Okay, now I'm just going to look at this with a classical head for a moment because it fascinates me how we use different language depending on the musical style that we're working in, when actually we're talking about the same chord in this case. So let's have a look at it this way in terms of it being a borrowed chord. Now, what do I mean by a borrowed chord? Well, quite often a borrowed chord is this. You're in a major key and you borrow a chord from the tonic minor key. All right, you can do the other thing. You can be in a minor key and you can borrow a chord from the tonic major key, not the relative, but from the tonic. Okay, so we have a piece of music in G major here, and I've got a chord here that's got an E flat in it. So you're thinking, well, why has it got an E flat if we're in the key of G major? Well, if we didn't have an E flat, we would describe this as chord 2-7-B. All right, because if we had an E natural and we were in the key of G major, chord 2 is A, C, E. And then if I put a G on it, I get a 2-7. If I put that in first inversion, I've got the same chord with a C in the bass. But I haven't got an E natural, I've got an E flat. And that would be a 2-7-B in the key of G minor, because in G minor, I've got a B flat and an E flat in the key signature, as well as an F sharp that I might well use along the way. So this is chord 1 in G minor, G, B flat, D. Chord 2, A, C, E flat. Aha. Put a 7th on it. What have I got? I've got A, C, E flat, G, which is a half diminished 7th chord, or a minor 7th flat 5 chord. So it's describing that. But what I'm saying is that in a more classical environment, this is functioning as a borrowed chord from the tonic minor key. The approach chord in this case I've used is chord 4. That's sort of quite a handy thing actually, because if I'm going from 4 to 2-7, it's quite handy that I've got common notes, like I'm repeating that C, I'm repeating that G, so it makes for a nice kind of link to it. But I could have done something else. I could have used a chord 2B and then gone straight to that borrowed 2-7-B. I could have done that instead. So there are other possibilities for the approach. But it's just an interesting thought, isn't it? And we've got this chord that we've defined. Here it is. This is the recipe for a half diminished 7th chord or a minor 7th flat 5 chord. And what I'm trying to do here is to show that there could be a context in a slightly different musical style where we would not particularly describe the chord as one of these, but we would describe it as one of these. But actually it amounts to the same thing. So a little bit of intrigue there as to how in this case a borrowed 2-7 from the tonic minor key is the same chord as the half diminished 7th or the minor 7th flat 5 chord.